My name is Elizabeth Jacobs, and I'm here to talk this morning about attachment challenges for foster children. And so I approach this topic from a number of different vantage points. I've been serving on the Foster Care Review Board for over 18 years now, right down the hall. I was there last Friday. And when I went to the training for Foster Care Review Board in this very room, they gave an evaluation and they asked if something was missing. And I said, well, you didn't say anything about attachment. I would think that was, important. And so I got home and really the phone was ringing. And they said, will you do it? And I said, I knew I shouldn't have put that in there. No, I said, I'd be glad to. So I have a degrees in psychology, and my master's specialty was human development. So I knew all about attachment. This was not, not difficult. So I put my talk together, and it wasn't long before I realized that everything I was talking about didn't pertain to the children we're talking about, because the children we're talking about are traumatized children. And the research they did on attachment that we all read in our psych books pertained to white middle class, well cared for children. So I had to do something about that. I think it's been 8 or 9 years ago. Let me back up a little bit. I also have been a full-time and part-time instructor at GCC and a few classes over at PV also since 19, and a long time. And I recently retired full-time, but I'm still teaching part-time. So when I started to look at my talk and realized that I needed to do some research, I asked GCC for a sabbatical to spend a year researching attachment as it pertains to traumatized children, specifically for us, of course, neglected and abused children. And they said yes. So the result, most of what you'll hear today is a result of that research. And you paid for that research because it was sabbatical. So now you can see if you got your money's worth. If you didn't, it's too late. The statute of limitations is run or something on the refund. So, and of course, as a psychologist, I was involved with foster children doing psych evals and things of children newly placed into care. And it became very evident to me right away that they really didn't care who I was, because I was like the 27th person they saw and they weren't interested in doing anything. So, so that was another connection for me. I was also a foster child. I was a foster child for 5 years. And when I heard a commercial for Foster Care Review Board, it sort of rang a bell, except that my experience was much different. I was never abused or neglected as a child. Our situation was that our father became sick and died from a brain tumor when I was 4 and a half, and my oldest brother was 18 and a half. So we are 14 years apart, so a wide age span there between youngest and oldest in our family. And shortly after that, our mother was diagnosed with cancer. And in those days, in the 50s and 60s, when you had surgery, you went in the hospital and you stayed there for, 4 or 6 weeks. Does anybody here remember oxygen tents? Only a few people. It's funny because the longer I do this, the fewer people say, yeah, I remember that. So I don't know. I had back surgery, 12 years ago. And the next day, and this is when they were doing the incision, the next day, a couple nurses came in and said, we're taking you for a walk. And I said, oh, no, you have the wrong room. And I was serious. I thought they couldn't possibly be. Oh, no. And they just dragged me like 6 inches. But at least they got me out of bed and I walked. It seemed like such a long walk to the table next to the bed. So, but in those days when our mother went to the hospital, they would put my oldest brother, I have 3 older brothers, and I into foster care. So I had that experience. I had the experience of going to a stranger's home who may or may not even care about you. And then, and I'll tell you some of those experiences as I talk today, because I think they're important. So there's that, and then I'm also an adoptive parent of 2 boys, so I know that process, and I know that feeling of being scared that they're going to come and take your kids away for the first couple of years, mostly because of stories that have happened over the years. There was one years ago in Michigan where they actually had a camera crew showing them taking this child out of the adoptive mother's arms and taking it away from her physically. And then the Elon Gonzalez or whatever it was down in Florida, remember that? They came in with M16s and flak jackets, and holy cow. So, and I think that's a fear in every adoptive parent's life. And it actually, my oldest son's biological mother did hire somebody to find him. And so when we got that call, all those fears just welled up inside that I was going to lose this child. And then I realized, he's 28 years old now. I probably don't have anything to worry about. And I didn't. So that's all I can think of right now. But if I think of anything else, I'll let you know. So a lot of different connections. So we're talking about attachment, and so every time I put these numbers up, they're wrong. So I've got some plus and minuses now, but I think that we're under 18,000 right now, children in foster care in Arizona. But what is true and what has held for many years is that almost 42% of them are between the ages of birth and 5 years old. Children between birth and 3 years old spend the longest time in foster care, have the highest reentry rate, which means they may be reunify with their parents and they come back into care. And I'll talk about that in a little while. And they're less likely, surprisingly, to be reunified. And what's most important about this is that this is the most important time of brain development from 0 to 3, which is why we have the 0 to 3 and the 0 to 5 and the cradle to crayons and all these programs now, because we know that this is where development starts and pretty much ends and becomes the foundation for all brain development later. And I have taught psychology for many years, and when I talk about neuropsychology, I always say the smallest entity of behavior is the neuron. And if there's anything wrong with that, it's going to be reflected in behavior. And we know now that this is very true of children who cannot make an attachment to somebody. So John Bowlby was sort of the father of attachment theory, and again, theory that pertains to well cared for children or average cared for children. But he did say that it's clear from the research that we're happiest when we have somebody we can rely on, somebody we can call if we're having a problem, or somebody we can even call when we're in trouble. We need to have somebody in our lives who is a continuous thread in our lives, who we can trust, and who we can tell anything, even if there's a problem. And this is the one person that the children we're talking about do not have. They don't have continuity. They don't have a single person in their lives. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So John Bowlby. There are dozens of definitions of attachment, but this is one I like. So I picked this one. A reciprocal process by which an emotional connection develops. Nice and simple. And this is a definition by Erik Erikson, who was the first psychologist to come up with a lifespan approach to human development. Rather than everything ends at 12, he carried it through to the last stages of life, to death, which he defines as 65, which is making me very nervous. But I'm hoping they'll expand that. And this, so the one thing that he really emphasized in attachment is it goes both ways. It goes from child to primary caregiver, let's just say mother, and then mother back to child. Now, I went to a conference once, and the speaker got up and was very, very angry at the beginning. She said, people get the terms attachment and bonding mixed up all the time, and I'm going to straighten you out. And I thought, okay. So a mother bonds to her child. A child attaches to the mother. All right, so that'll be on the final exam. And I use them interchangeably, and I use them wrong, so sorry. But this occurred. So while I was doing my research, all these questions came up, and they just ate at me. So one of them was, when does this attachment occur? This attachment occurs, what I found from the research is anywhere between 6 and 12 months. Some people said 11 months, some people said 10, some people said 7, some people said 6. So here's the age span. 6 and 12 months to a primary caregiver. And this is a question that comes up all the time. Well, can't children attach to a bunch of people? They can once they attach to a primary caregiver. And it's that attachment that gives them the quality of attachment that's going to go to other people as well. So somewhere between 6 and 12 months, children make an attachment to a primary caregiver. And it's the nature of that attachment that determines, really, the nature of the rest of their relationships, which we'll talk about. This is the most important aspect of behavior when we're talking about really foster children in this case. So we have so this is the attachment cycle. We have a child who has a need. The child might be hungry, the child might be scared, the child might be cold, they might be bored, and they communicate that to the primary caregiver. So an infant who's hungry usually cries. A child who's bored usually cries, whines, there's nothing to do. Summertime, it's great for 2 weeks, and then after that, there's nothing to do. the caregiver correctly reads that need. So do you remember when your children were little how you knew the difference between a hunger cry and a tired cry and a bored cry? And do you remember how your mother-in-law thought they were all hunger cries? She was, and I discovered that many years ago. Our kids were just so chubby after they came back from grandma's. So, and then once the caregiver reads that correctly and the child's satisfied, the child goes back to whatever they were doing. And so this behavior becomes an attachment behavior. A child elicits the help of a caregiver in a specific way, and it might be different for different children. Well, what about the mother and father who are busy in the living room with their meth lab? This happened in one of our cases. And there's a baby in the other room in a crib. So that baby cries and cries and cries. That's how she's asking for food and doesn't get any help. So she tries a different behavior. She starts banging her head against the side of the crib. And the mother excuses herself in the living room, throws in a bottle, and goes back to whatever she was doing in the living room. So now, what is the baby's attachment behavior then, or for food? Banging her head. So now the police come in. This is the actual case. The police came in, found the baby in the crib, also found almost newborn laying face down in a basket who they thought was dead, and was not dead, but has suffered so many problems: deafness, blindness, just terrible results of breathing in this meth lab. So now that baby goes to a foster home where these people just want to love these kids back to normalcy. And the baby's hungry. What does the baby do? Bangs their head. What do the foster parents do? Freak out. That's right, because they're not expecting this. So one thing I have stuck in my craw is foster parent training. In fact, I went to one. I was invited to a very small group, and she said, "Well, can you come? Here's the address." And that's like 3 blocks from my house. So I went over there, and they actually had a foster parent up talking before, and it was like the worst situation. And so she describes this foster child who's doing all this stuff, and you could see these potential foster parents going, "Oh wow, wait a minute, I know." And at the end, even the therapist got up and said, "Now, don't leave, please. There's more." But wait, there's more. But what's interesting about children is they don't want to leave. They really don't want to leave their homes because they know how to get what they need there. So if we have children who are not being fed, they know how to go sneak food and hoard it. Or they know how to steal money, or they know how to avoid abuse. They know when to hide. They know when to come out. They know all that. And that's all they know. They don't know 3 meals a day. They don't know hugs. One of the worst things you can do is hug a child who's been hit. Bruce Perry writes some great stuff, and he heads the Trauma Academy in Texas. Can't remember the specific name of it, but it's in the bibliography. And I was reading something of his. He said, when we're born, we don't know what touch is. And I went, oh, well, wait, oh, yeah, it's true. Because we've never been touched unless we're a multiple. But so we get our idea of what touch is by the touch we get when we're infants and babies. And we had a 4-month-old baby several years ago with 18 broken bones. And they were all in different stages of healing, which means this baby's idea of touch was not what everybody else's. So the worst thing you could do to that child is go hug them back to normalcy. It doesn't work. In fact, before I wrote this book, I went to talk to Dr. Glenn Moe, who's a psychologist, just retired in Phoenix, great guy, and we talked about that. It takes a lot more than love for these children because they haven't had a normal life. Excuse me. So the first time our mother had to go in the hospital, our oldest brother and our mother sat us down. Oh, I forgot to tell you this. My nickname is Boopsie. Boopsie. Okay? Good. So they sat us down, Jimmy and Boopsie, and said, Mom has to go in the hospital, and so you're going to have to go somewhere else for a while. We were probably maybe 5 and 7, maybe a little younger, but I think about 5 and 7. And so we said, well, where are we going? I mean, we didn't, I was 5 years old, and I didn't know what any of this, I didn't even know what a hospital was, I'm sure. We said, where are we going? So we're going to go to Uncle Vernon and Aunt Shirley's. Well, Uncle Vernon and Aunt Shirley, who are they? Because we had never met Uncle Vernon and Aunt Shirley, or at least we didn't remember them. On our foster care review board a couple of months ago, case manager said, these children have been in a foster home for a couple of years. The parents did services, then didn't, then they just kind of disappeared. And they said, well, they have an aunt and uncle in Ohio, so we're trying to see if that's a placement. And my question was, do they know the aunt and uncle? And the answer was no. But we're setting up meetings. They're flying out here every couple of weeks, and in 6 weeks. And I said, well, but they've been in this placement that wants to adopt them for 2 years. And that's. So kinship isn't everything. So we went to Uncle Vernon and Aunt Shirley's, and it was great. And they were very nice. And they had other kids, and they had toys, and they had a Lazy Susan in the middle of the table, which we had never seen before. And they put all the food on it at dinner and just spun it around. It took us a long time to figure this out, how you get the food as it's coming around. But we finally figured it out. And it was wonderful. And then we went home to our mother and our brothers. Now, when our mother first came home, she was sick. She was in a hospital bed. We took care of her. And then she very gradually got better. And then about 6 months later, and by the time she knew that she had a breast tumor, but because our father was sick, she didn't do anything. So by the time she got into medicine, it was spread. So they just did all kinds of surgeries. So about 6 months later, she just said, "Boopsie, Jimmy, Mom has to go in the hospital. You're going to have to go somewhere else for a while." And we said, "Uncle Vernon, Aunt Shirley's?" And they said, "No, you're going to go somewhere else." "Oh, who?" "Mrs. Graham." "Who's that?" "Well, it's a lady's going to take care of you while Mom's in the hospital." Okay, so we went to Mrs. Graham's, and it didn't take a genius to figure out we were wondering why she was taking care of children in the first place. Well, it started with Jimmy letting a bird in the living room. That's not a good thing to do because apparently they mess up the wall, so that wasn't a good start. And then I was downstairs in her basement making, this is in Illinois, by the way, making something for my mother. I always made her a craft when she was in the hospital. And Mrs. Graham opened the door and said, "Boopsie, time for dinner." I said, "Okay, I'll be there in a minute." And she said, "No, you'll come now." And she came down the stairs, ripped up the thing I was making, and actually dragged me upstairs by my arm, threw me at a table in front of something that we had never seen before called rice. Never had rice. We come from a German background. We didn't know what we ate because it was always covered with gravy anyway, but it wasn't rice. So we sat there for a long, it seemed like hours. It was probably 5 minutes. Ate the rice, talking to each other, trying to figure out what's going on here. So in Illinois, when I was a child, if you made a telephone call, it was a toll call across the street. I mean, you couldn't, it was a charge for everything. So I had an aunt, a couple of aunts that had a lock for the rotary phone. This is, I don't know, do you remember this? And so it just went in the one, so you could only go that far. But what we learned is if you picked up the receiver went like this, the operator would come on. So I was crying, and I picked up the receiver. And I said, we had an aunt who was a manager of a hotel in Chicago. And so I said, I want to talk to Auntie at the Traymore Hotel. Not hard to find. She had 15 nieces and nephews, and we always went down to the hotel and had a ball down there. So they got to the Traymore Hotel. They got Auntie. She said, "Where are you?" I said, "I don't know. You're so mean." So she said, "Let me put her on the phone." So I went downstairs and said, "Mrs. Graham, telephone." And she went, "Huh." She didn't hear it ring. So my aunt said, "You will have those children on the curb in 20 minutes. I'm coming to get them." So you can't come and get these children. She said, if you want me to bring the Chicago Police Department with me, I'll do that. And we were on the curb in 20 minutes. Now, she ran this hotel. She used to pay off the Chicago Police Department policemen to put on uniforms and scare residents out so she didn't have to do eviction paperwork. And for $50, she said they would come in and do that. She also used to apparently pay off the fire department for inspections. And I learned this about 5 years ago. It said to one of my brothers, "So we're living in a fire trap?" I said, "No, it wasn't a fire trap. Just those gasoline rags by the hot water heater or something. Not a big deal." Anyway, so but it was disguised as tickets to the fireman's ball or something. Anyway, so she was a character. So we went to stay with her. She came and got us. We went to stay with her. Now, we went to a Catholic school in Winnetka, and now we're going to a Catholic school in Chicago with our Winnetka uniforms. Not a good idea. Just put a target on a child's back. Send them to a Catholic school in the wrong uniform. Anyway, one of the first days we were there, Jimmy said something to Sister Margaret. I'm sure it wasn't real good. Sorry about the mic thing. And so she took a swing at him. So we went from hugging nuns in Winnetka to hitting nuns in Chicago. This is true. And Jimmy just took a step back, and she missed. So we ran home, said, "Auntie, Sister Margaret tried to hit Jimmy." Oh, I probably should have used Mrs. Graham's name, should I? Graham. Okay. So she said, "I will take care of it." And we just sat down because we knew this was going to be good. We listened to her on the phone. So she called to the rectory and talked to the Monsignor and said, when these children are in my care, your nuns will not touch them. I can't tell you what a good feeling that gave us. Ooh, we got some Chicago politics power here. I don't know what it is, but it was great. So, and he said, I have no control over the nuns. I lost it years ago. There's nothing I can do about it. If they're going to hit them, they're going to hit them. And she said, if those nuns hit these children when they're in my care, I will have them put in jail. And the Monsignor said, well, you can't put nuns in jail. She said, not only can I do it, I know exactly who I have to pay off the Chicago Police Department to have it done. And they never went near us again. They also didn't talk to us, and they weren't nice to us, but at least we didn't get hit. So that became the person. That became this person that we could all go to. All of my brothers and I could go to her, because you could do anything and she'd be on your side. She'd justify it. Well, I threw a rock for this person's window. You probably thought it was a brick wall. Oh, okay, whatever. So so she became what Bowlby refers to as a secure base, which we'll talk about in a second. So the point I wanted to make here is that these children who have these odd behaviors bring these behaviors into foster care, and foster parents don't understand them. And bio parents also have trouble responding to unusual behaviors. And so children learn then not to become attached. So we have a child who comes in, his whole life he's been hoarding food, and the foster parents don't like that. So they don't understand this need. In fact, when I do this talk to multidisciplinary groups, I always have adoptive parents coming up saying, we adopted this child 5 years ago, and we still find food hidden in his room, under his bed, under his mattress, in his closet. Because, which we'll talk about this in a minute, this is hardwired into their brain. So we'll talk about the brain development. So children learn not to become attached. David Pelzer wrote and all these books are in the bibliography at the end of the presentation handout you have. But he wrote a book. He wrote 3 books: A Child Called It, The Lost Boy, and A Man Called Dave. And then he wrote 2 more books after that. But this was sort of his trilogy about foster care. And he says this about being a foster child: the first 2 ultimate rules of being a foster child that I'd learned while at Aunt Mary's were never to become too attached to anyone and never take someone's home for granted. And I had foolishly broken both rules. I've been so naive as to convince myself that I would live with Rudy and Lillian for the rest of my life. I closed my eyes as I fought back the tears. We have children on our board that have had so many placements. One coming up here, I think, has had 22 placements. How can you attach to somebody when you're moving that much? Mary Ainsworth came along, and she wanted to take John Bowlby's theories and put them to the test or do some research on it. So she came up with a research method called the Strange Room, and to assess attachment health. And she would have a mother and a child come in a room. Sometimes there would be a stranger in there, and sometimes there wouldn't be, if they wanted to see how the children reacted to strangers. And the mother, after the child was comfortable, the mother would leave, and they'd see how when she came back, how the child greeted the mother. If the child greeted the mother and gave her a hug and said hello and then went back to play, that's healthy attachment. That's a secure attachment. A child who clings or avoids is an insecure attachment. So what Bowlby says about attachment is that these people that children are attached to become a secure base. Whether they're infants and they crawl over to you, or they're teenagers and they call you for money, or they're 42-year-olds and still call you for money, that becomes, or for advice. So my children are now, my 30 and 40-something-year-old children are now at that point where they're asking me advice about child rearing and about stuff that, well, when I have kids, I'm never doing that. Well, they did it all. They're doing it. Or one son used to call and he'd say, did I ever do that? And this is probably the only lie that I repeat over and over again. And now I say, oh, yes, but much worse. Oh, and they go, oh, I'm so sorry. It's okay. I'm okay. It was hard, but we got through it. Anyway, so this is what it's securely or insecure attachment. Based on how these children responded. So a secure attachment is in a bond that's positive and consistent. There's a sense of trust there. And that's what Eric Erikson talks about when he talks about human development. Then we go through this series of crises, and we have to resolve these crises at each, or conflicts also, at each stage. And the very first one, when we're first born, is getting a sense of trust versus mistrust. And we get that by having our diapers changed, being fed, being warm, being held, being touched, being talked to. One of the things I love to do with my grandchildren is just when they were just little infants is just talk to them and watch them memorize my face, because, children do that, and they do that like in a little Z fashion, and they'll put a little memory of it. This is Grandma Boopsie's face. And so I remember I was with my little grandson, Evan, and I'm just watching, and I could just see his eyes going like this. And just, he's memorizing my face. And I'm talking to him. My daughter came and said, "Mom, what are you doing?" I said, "I'm watching him memorize my face." She said, "You're scaring him." I said, "No, I'm not." I said, "I might be scaring you, but I'm not scaring him. He's enjoying this." So this is Grandma Boopsie's face. So another time with another grandchild, this is why I wanted a grandchild, and I want more. And they said no. So then we have this thing going on, just because they're almost in their 40s. My little granddaughter saw a toy in the living room, and my daughter had a metal gate between the tile and the living room carpet to keep the dogs and the children out of the living room. So she saw that, and she pulled that metal gate on the tile, and it made a noise. So she ran over, and I was just standing there, and she touched my feet, and she looked up at me. And I said, "It's okay. It's okay." So she ran over, she put a little bit more, ran back over here, touched my feet, and looked at me. I said, "This is perfect. I'm going to put this in my talk." Because this is a great example of a secure base. She needed to know that that was okay. She eventually got open, crawled in there, and got her toy and came out. And so we do this from birth to 65, apparently, with somebody that who we trust, who's consistent, who we can go to for help. So insecure attachment, there's two types of those. Resistant, and this is a child who doesn't know. This is like having a teenager where you don't know from day to day if they like you or not, And I used to do this, what I call the tickle test. I go up to my teenagers and I tickle them, and if they laughed, I continue to talk to them. And if they said, just back away. Just back away till eventually they'll like you again. Well, children sometimes don't know what to expect either. Maybe their parents have been through drug rehab and they were okay for a while. We've had so two statistics that I thought were important. One is, what is the reunification rate in cases where children have been removed for neglect and abuse across the country? And it has stayed the same for the last 12 years, ranging from 51 to 52%. That means 51 to 52% of children who are removed from their parents for neglect and abuse are reunified with their parents. 52%. The rest of them are really the children we're talking about. The children who are trying to find somebody to attach to, trying to find a permanent home. But then the next statistic I wanted, by the way, one of the main courses I taught was statistics. Okay, got that out of the way. So I love statistics, I love numbers. So the other one that I was looking for was how many of those that are reunified then get reopened and the children get returned to care. And that one, there was no national statistic. So I had to go from state to state for states who reported this. And only about 30 states reported. And it ranged from 25% to 64% of children who are reunified with their parents are then removed again. And then I wanted to find out how many who get reunified the second time, and that there's no statistic for that. And I would love to get into a database somewhere and find this, because we had a case just a few months ago where the children were removed 3 times. Removed, reunified, removed, reunified, removed. And during this time, one baby, in fact, I think I have a slide of it, one baby was born during all of this. And they decided that that would be a good time to reunify the children. They finally took them away the 3rd or 4th time, or however that works, because she was beating 2 children bare bottom with a belt. And they took them away. And as Foster Care Review Board, we recommended for the 2nd or 3rd time 7-cent adoption. And so they finally did it. But that little baby's been in care for most of her life. And so the other type of insecure attachment is avoidant. This is a child who's always been rebuffed or hurt or something or neglected by the parent. And so there's nothing there. They don't try to figure out, what mood they're in. So that's what they thought. That's what they thought. Until the mid-'80s, in fact, their name was Solomon and Maine, researchers who looked at Mary Ainsworth's tapes, because she used to tape all of these strange room research projects, and they were looking at them, and what they found is that some of the kids that they thought were securely attached, that looked like they were being playful, actually weren't being playful. They were actually being a little bit aggressive, trying to knock the parents' glasses off, or and they would put these kids down, and they just stand there and dazed. And so these researchers, Solomon and Maine, looked into the background of these children and found out that they had been abused. They were from abusive homes. So they came up with an additional attachment category, bless you, of disorganized, disoriented. So what they found out is it was common to children who had been abused. This doesn't mean that every abused and neglected child is going to have this. Some kids go through the worst stuff and they come out great. And people go, why is that? Well, there's a lot of reasons. It could be a gene. It could be a resilience gene. It could be they found one person in their life who was that common thread who guided them along. Or it could be they ended up in a really good home. So it doesn't happen to all children, but it's more likely to happen in children who are abused. So we have these attachment problems with foster care. So if you're up at 2 in the morning, you've heard this line before. But wait, there's more. There's more to the spin brush than you thought. This is what we know now. So what I would like to do is go back to 1999, all the talks I've done. By the way, I do this for the judges. I do this for State Foster Care Review Board, for you, and then nationally I do this talk for different groups, including I did one for attorneys up, and I do this for a lot of different groups. And I want to go back to every single one of them and say, wait, we have to redo this now, because this is the piece that wasn't in there in 1999. What we know now about brain development. So what we know is that when we're born, now the estimates are between 80 and 100 billion neurons. I'm not sure when we're talking about billions, that's an important distinction, but somewhere between 80 and 100 billion neurons at birth. That's what we have at birth. Most of them are unconnected. And it's our experiences that connect those neurons. And so an experience that's repeated, a child who's repeatedly held, repeatedly talked to, repeatedly sung to, stroked, those neural connections are going to become strong with the repetition. Children who might be held once and then not held at all will have an initial connection, but that connection will get pruned. So infants make 700 to 1,000 neural connections per second from the minute they're born. And the ones that are repeated, the experiences that are repeated, become strong. And the ones that are not get pruned and go away. And that's why we can't hug a child who's never been hugged. They don't have the neural connections for that. They don't have the wiring for that. And there's a debate about whether we can change that or not. And that's why for us, time is of the essence. Get these children when they're in that. So about 80% of brain development occurs between birth and 3 years old. Another another 10% from 3 to 5, and then the remainder in the 20s. And when I tell this to college students, they hate it. They say, your brain's not done yet. And they go, well, that's rude. I said, well, it's true. The frontal lobe isn't quite done. I mean, it's mostly done, but not quite. And that's why we have, I remember when I was in college going down the river, jumping off cliffs, I wasn't thinking. My frontal lobe wasn't there yet, to give me some direction. So children who are in a constant state of abuse or neglect can actually sort of have brains that are set on this constant, on all these neural connections that are about nothing but abuse and neglect. And they can become hypervigilant. I don't know if I have it on here or not. We had a little boy, and he was on Wednesday's Child. And I'm looking at this child because we see pictures of the children. Sometimes they come in, and I knew this was one of our children. And they said all he wants to do is have somebody to play football with. That's all he wants. I'm thinking, wait a minute. This is a child who's been diagnosed as hypervigilant. This is a child who has suffered so much abuse that all he does is scan the environment looking for the next abuse. And anything that looks like that, he has a meltdown. So if the abuse was somebody in a yellow shirt, boom, there's a yellow shirt. That's what this child does. So I was giving this talk, and so the sad part for me is that they didn't represent this child correctly. And I'm afraid they're going to get a whole bunch of football playing foster dads in there who want to adopt this child. And then they find out the severe problems they have. So I was giving this talk for judges, and at the break, one of the judges asked me to come over to her table, and I sat down. She said, my husband is an architect. I'm a Superior Court judge. And we met this little boy, fell in love. We were going to adopt him, and we met him over and over again. It was great. And just before we were getting into the legalities, they said, by the way, here's his diagnosis. Here's his therapy schedule. Here are the meds he's on. And she said, we can't do it. I'm a full-time judge. He's a full-time architect. We didn't have time to take him in 2 or 3 times a day to all these places to get med checks and therapy and all of this. And so they had to back away from it. And this happens all the time. And this is just another broken connection for these children who get their hopes up. And if this happens more than once, then they just give up. And even Jimmy and I got that feeling, after let's see, Miss Grandma. So after Mom came home, we went back from Auntie's back to Winnetka with our mother and brother. Took care of our mother for a while. She recovered, and it happened over and over again. And after a while, we figured this out, and we weren't bad kids. Well, Jimmy was. Just kidding. Edit that out. No, we really weren't bad kids. But what one foster mother said about us is that Jimmy was angry, and to me, she said, and you were sad. That's how we both dealt with it. He was angry, I was sad. So we realized after a while, we're never going to see these people again. It doesn't really matter what we do. No, we really weren't bad, but we didn't make any connections with him because we're never going to see him again anyway. And we don't even, Jimmy and I get together, we have completely different memories. So do you remember that one? I said, no, I have no idea what you're talking about. What? And then I say something, he does the same thing. So we have completely different memories. So this experience then with these neurons is the foundation of the brain upon which all later development rests. And so if children don't have a neural connection for something, like for good touch or for conversation or for being a part of a family, it's not going to be there. And anything they need later, any development they need later, is not going to have a foundation to sit on. And so this is the piece that's been missing. And this is the piece that's a little scary because they thought, we could just love these kids back to, well, we know now that it's also neurological, and that's going to be difficult. Bruce Perry wrote a book called The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. It's on the list. I highly recommend it because he talks about a new therapy he's doing. But what he's doing this with a 15-year-old who cannot be touched. And so he's trying to make neural connections. And so he's just like shaking his hand. And he'll do that for, 6 months. And then maybe he'll touch his arm. Well, it's going to take years and years and years. And if there's any break in that, if there's any progress and then somebody hurts him again or something, then it's just going to start all over again or never happen again. And that's what happens to kids who almost get to a placement and then the placement backs out or they back out. Oftentimes a child will be almost adopted and they'll do something. Like they'll go kick the dog or they'll smash a kid and family and it disrupts. Why do they do that? To sabotage. And why do they want to sabotage it?
Because they want to see if they're going to walk out.
Yeah. Are you going to stick with me? Let's find out. Boom. Oh, guess not. And after they have that experience over and over again, they give up. And then they don't even try to attach more because what's the point? And even though our situation was completely different, to a certain extent, we did that. We're going to be here for a while. We have to survive. And then we're going home to our mother and brothers. And this is where we wanted to be. So Jerry Seinfeld made a movie called B-Movie. Has anybody seen that? If you just want a night of relaxing and fun, just watch this little movie. It's a little cartoon movie about a bee. And it's a bee who comes out of the hive. Have you seen it? And he goes into the big city, and he goes into this apartment. He goes through this window of this apartment. He thinks he sees the sun. Of course, it's a light bulb. And he goes to leave, and they close the window. And he can't see the glass. So he goes to leave. He goes, whoa! What was that? That's diabolical. I think I'll try again. Boom. I think I'll try again. Boom. Again. And he quits. This is exactly what foster children do when they're trying to attach to somebody and they get moved from home to home or they get a case manager turnover. Oh, that's another talk. Anyway, because they do get attached to people, but eventually. And John Bowlby actually noticed this in the hospitals when he first started doing the research. And this was hospitals too, but in England, they have nurseries, which are 24-hour, not the nurseries we think about. And during the war, people would bring their children to these nurseries, either for safekeeping, or maybe they were children of other people who had gone to war, gotten killed. And so what John Bowlby witnessed were these children protesting when they had to leave their caregivers, and they would yell and scream and protest. And what he found was that they immediately attached to the next person that took care of them, the next nurse, made that attachment. But then as the shifts would change, they would lose that person. And then they'd sort of attach to the next person. And what he noticed was eventually they just gave up. They just gave up. And that's what these children do. So this is a brain of... This is a brain. This is a child who has not been abused. And this is a child who has been abused, and these are their brains. So it has a physiological effect on the brain, and this comes from Bruce Perry's Child Trauma Academy. So the message is here: time is of the essence. The younger we can help these children, the earlier we help these children, the more chance they have to develop normally, neurologically. So that's why they started the 0 to 3 and the birth to 5 and the cradle to crayons. Everybody knows this now. When I first started this, we go, are you sure? Well, everybody knows this now, so they're doing this. So in time and care, so children have spent a certain amount of time in care before it can be changed to some sort of adoption if the parents aren't doing their services. Well, now it's 6 months for 0 to 3, and it used to be the 15 months like it is for everybody else. So I think it's 6 months for 0 to 3 and 9 months up to 5, and then 15 months after that. So people are recognizing this now. Time is of the essence. So now we have children. Now we have two problems. We have children who have unusual behaviors they bring in because they bring in the behaviors that help them survive, and we have children who come in with stress-related neural underdevelopment or problems. So now we have two problems with children coming into care. But wait, there's more. So sometimes these children come into care, and this is, a bee in my bonnet or something in my craw or whatever you want to call it. Children who come into care who display specific behaviors that look psychological or psychiatric. And so a child comes into care and they're depressed. So they put them on an antidepressant medication. And I discovered this a few years ago when I was asked to do a talk for the Arizona State school nurses because they were having children coming in who were nauseous, who were fainting, who were tired, who had high blood pressure, children with high blood pressure, and they couldn't figure out what it was. And then when they dug a little deeper, because they were not told, they found out that they were foster children on psychotropic medication. And so that's what they wanted to know. What kind of drugs are they on? So I went to my brother Jimmy's lake house with my other brothers and their families, and we all get together and drink wine. We all get together and talk. And so I was working on this talk, and I was in one room, and they were all in the kitchen drinking soda. And I ran into this term called off-label prescribing, and I didn't know what it was, because how can they prescribe these medications for children? They don't even do research on children because it's so dangerous. How do they do this? Lithium for children? What? So I just, as usual, my usual professional manner, just yelled into the kitchen, "Hey, anybody know what off-label prescribing is?" And they came back. The consensus means generic. I went, no, it doesn't. So what is it?
Off-label prescriptions are when they use a known drug for a purpose other than its design. So they can use, they do a lot with ADHD and some of the other bipolars and things.
Right.
They'll use a drug that works for one thing, but it's actually designed for another purpose.
And they can use it, if it's designed for adults, they can use it on children also. Yeah. And that's the problem. And so the research that I found, so here are the classes of psychotropic meds: antipsychotics, antidepressants, anti-manic, anti-seizure, and stimulants. And in this article by Zito in 2008, he says that of the children who are prescribed psychotropic meds, 41% have 4 different classes of meds. And so we don't even know what this does to neurological development. And in my cynical question is, if a child is removed from their home where they know how to survive, and they get depressed, shouldn't they be depressed? Isn't that a normal reaction? And so another study looked at children who were foster children and children who were in the general population, and found out that foster children are prescribed 3 times the meds for a psychiatric problem as those in the general population with the same symptoms. And so we don't even know the outcome. So I've got this great, my board, we've been together for so long. We've watched our children grow up. We've watched each other get puppies and have to have the puppies put to sleep, 15 years later. So I think one of the men on our board has been there for over 20 years. Then we have and so he's sort of an engineer, and he's just has that engineering personality. A guy will come in who's parents will come in, and he challenges him. So what's your drug of choice? I go, oh, don't ask him that. He'll come over the table at us. He says, what's your drug of choice? Meth. And he always gets an answer from him. Oh. And the other thing that he asked that I think is really interesting is, so these parents, we had this couple and one of their mothers, one grandmother, and they came in, and actually, this is a different story, but I'm going to tell you anyway. And so, I knew there's something wrong with him, but I don't know enough about drugs, because even though I was a teenager in the 60s, I didn't get into it that much. I didn't get into it at all. Okay, so so they came in, so this board member says, what are you on right now? I went, oh. And this guy was like 6'2", 300 pounds. I went, oh my God. And I'm looking for the button, because I have the button right next to me, get the security button. I'm going, where is it? They moved the button. And he says, meth. He says to his wife, are you on it too? Yeah. And grandma. They're all on meth at the foster care review board. So that was kind of interesting. But one of the questions he asked that I think is so important. So we have parents whose 5 children are taken away from them, and they have to drop UAs, and they have to go to counseling, they have to do domestic violence, and they have to do parent aid, and they have to do visits, and all of these requirements from the case plan. But they're doing them all, and they might be doing them all fine, but they're doing them all without children. They're not taking care of children anymore. So one of the things that Rich always asks them is what's going to be different when you get the children back? Are you going to be able to do this and take care of 5 children? Taking care of children is stressful. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean taking care of children is stressful, period. And so, and that's the question you always ask, what's going to be different? Are you going to move? Are you going to get help? Even though you're doing these tasks now, will you be able to keep it up and take care of all these children? And it's an excellent question. One of the things we don't know is because they haven't done research on these drugs in children, what effect it has on the brain, on brain development, on behavior, on attachment, and the ability to attach. So I'm the psychologist on the board. So so sometimes I'll say, well, when was he diagnosed with depression? Oh, I don't know, it's a few years ago. Oh, who diagnosed it? I don't know. So I always ask for a new psych eval. Now, there's a psychological evaluation. Psychologists do this, and in their recommendations, they either recommend or not that this person go to a psychiatrist for medication. And then there's the psychiatric evaluation, which is to look at a person who's on meds and see if their levels are okay. Now, a lot of people get this mixed up because somebody said, well, he had a psych eval. I say, well, because I used to do psych evals, and they take like 2 days. It's not you sit down with somebody for 20 minutes. Well, what they're referring to is they went to a psychiatrist and their levels in their blood are okay. Well, these children might not need these drugs anymore. So I always ask for a new psychological evaluation, which drives them crazy. They walk in, they see me, and they go, oh God, we're going to have a new psych eval. Anyway, because we had a case where this child was on multiple medications. I listed the medications and gave it to one of my colleagues at GCC because I don't know enough about meds for this. And the big complaint was that he slept during school. At the group home said he slept during school. So Dwayne called me, and I said, should he be sleeping during school? He said, no. I went, oh. He said he should be in a coma with all these meds he's taking. So I called for a new psych eval to see if he really needed that. But we don't know. So now we have 3 problems. Now we have kids with odd behaviors, kids with neurological deficits, and kids who are on medication that we don't even know about. This is a little boy, 2nd grade, this is several years ago, domestic violence, parental drug use. He was very aggressive. He would threaten people, say his father was going to kill him. And they called the police several times to school for this 8-year-old boy. They called the police. He was on Depakote for an anti-seizure, and it's prescribed off-label. He was also on Zoloft. This SSRI is called serotonin, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. And so this is a neuron, and of course, bless you, neurotransmitters go from one neuron to another through this little space, synapse. And if this neuron needs a certain amount of neurotransmitter, chemical, it'll just take what it wants, and the rest will just kind of sit in the space and get taken back by the sending neuron. Well, this SSRI prevents that so that more neurotransmitter gets through. And every SSRI has a black box warning about suicide, especially in adolescents. So these drugs are very, very dangerous, and we need to use them with caution. But one of the things that the state school nurses were talking about are these side effects. And these are, so Depakote, their side effects are breathing difficulties, bruising, agitation, insomnia, liver damage. Zoloft, agitation, anxiety, diarrhea, dizziness, dry mouth, gas. Intuniv, dizziness, drowsiness, dry mouth, headache, tiredness. Risperidone, and this is for schizophrenia. But they use it as an antipsychotic to calm kids down. Very dangerous drug. Insomnia, rapid heartbeat, tardive dyskinesia, which is a side effect that can't be cured. And it's where all the muscles just start to relax and contract just by themselves. And so, and of course, this is only for adults only. So very serious. So all of these things interfere with a child's ability to attach to anybody because they're just being drawn further and further away. So then, once they're in care, they experience all this other stuff. Multiple case managers, probably not multiple CASAs. In fact, probably the one person that will stay with them is you, because you'll stay with these children. But case managers, the turnover is amazing. I mean, we're shocked if we get the same case manager 2 months or 2 reviews in a row, which are every 6 months. And foster homes. So if there's a problem, so we get this little baby, she goes to a foster home, she bangs her head for food, foster parents say, we can't handle this. This is not what we signed up for. We can't handle it. So the baby gets moved, and the baby gets moved, and the baby gets moved. And they finally learn, it doesn't do any good. And then their attachment to others just becomes very resistant. So mom went in the hospital. She said, we were probably 7 and 9 or 6 and 8 by now. And she said, you're going to, we found you another place. I went, okay. This isn't new for us anymore. Where are we going now? Well, this is actually a home in Winnetka, so you can keep going to Sacred Heart School. That was good, because remember, these are hugging nuns, so we get away from the hitting nuns in Chicago. And my brother was a cop in Winnetka. He said, Ed's going to pick you up in the morning in the squad car, which is kind of cool. Except the first time he did that, he stopped in front of the school and said, okay, get out. We were in the back seat. We were going, there are no handles in the back seat of a squad car. He thought that was funny. So I was abused. Oh, that was terrible. Or he sometimes drove the bus too, and he would come and pick us up. So that was kind of interesting. The first night we were there, I was playing in the living room with something, deck of cards and something. Mrs. Haynes came in and said, Boopsie, time for dinner. I didn't know what deja vu was, but I think I had it. And I said, okay, well, I'll be there in a minute because, I'm not going to see these people again anyway. And I wasn't mean, but I just really, didn't care or something. So she came over and she put her arms around me. I stood up and she put her arms around me and she carried me upstairs. Now, this is the second time I've been carried upstairs by a foster mother because I didn't do what I was told. But I remember going upstairs like I remember an accident in slow motion. Just going upstairs thinking, well, this doesn't hurt, but I can't get out of it, that's for sure. She's not yelling at me or anything. That's a good sign, I guess. I don't know what's up there. So she took me upstairs to this beautiful sleeping porch. I don't know if you've ever seen these glassed-in sleeping porches in the Midwest, but it was just amazing. It had toys and books and all kinds of stuff. And she said, here's the deal. Now, this is long before Olive Garden came up with this for their commercial. I want you to know that. She said, when you're here, you're family. Olive Garden. She said, and we're going to take care of you. And so now we're going to have dinner, and then we're going to clean up, and then we're going to watch 10 seconds of TV. They were very strict. And we're going to, play Parcheesi and do all this stuff. And you're going to go to school in the morning, and you're going to come home, and this is what we're going to do because you're part of this family. And we started going there every time we had to. And in fact, Our mother died when I was 10 and Jimmy was 12, and we went with the Haynes. And that's where we wanted to stay. They were wonderful people. And even when our mother was home, we could go see her. And she's very supportive, wonderful person. And she stuck with us until 4 years ago when she died at 101. And I'd go see her in San Diego. I saw her when she was like, I don't know, 95, just a kid. And I got lost because it's what I do. And so I was like an hour late, and I don't know where we were in California, but I drove to see her. And she said, "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. You're late." And my young, I don't drive anymore. So my young friend, who's only 87, is picking me up, and we're going to play bridge, and then we're going to the Jane Eyre Book Club, and then we're going to a bazaar, and then we're going to do this. And she said, "So can you come back tomorrow?" And I was just like a little kid. Well, okay, I'll come back tomorrow. And just a wonderful, supportive person. And that was the person we needed in our lives. Now, we had our mother, and she was a wonderful, wonderful person. And I think that's why my brothers and I have hardly had any prison time. No. My oldest brother was a cop and in the service, and my next brother is a Phoenix judge, and my next brother was a salesman. He could sell anything to anybody, just amazing, retired at 50. And I managed to make it through school too. So we're actually all fairly successful. And I think it's because we did have parents through those important years where we made connections, and that allowed us to do that. But anyway, so Mrs. Haynes was our outcome, and it was wonderful. So I want to say a few words about reactive attachment disorder, and those words are very rare, very rare. People talk about RAD all the time, and it's very rare, mostly in boys. The DSM-5, which just came out, I don't know, probably 2 years ago now, maybe 3 years ago, and it took a long time to come out. I mean, there's a bunch of people sitting around a table for like 2 years. Then they came out with an announcement in 2010 that the DSM-5 wouldn't be out till 2013. 3 more years. It was so funny because so they've planned 3 years of discussion and argument and debate. The DSM-5 actually divided reactive attachment disorder into 2 disorders. Reactive attachment disorder, these are children who withdraw from adults because they're afraid. And the other one is disinhibited social engagement disorder, which I can never say. And these are children who will go to everyone. So we had a case manager. I asked for a psych eval and especially a bonding assessment. Who is this child bonded to? And here's the conundrum of making a decision that's in the best interest of the child, which is our bylaw. I mean, that's it, best interest of the child. Do they stay with a family that they've been with for 2 years, where they're bonded, who's taking care of them, to whom they're attached, or do they go with parents who after 3 or 4 years have decided to do their services? And who haven't had a good track record. So it's a very difficult decision. So we had a case manager, and I asked for a bonding assessment to make that decision. And she said, "Oh, there's no attachment problem with this child. This child will go to anyone," which is a symptom of attachment disorder. So I'm constantly asking for attachments. There are so many links. I mean, I used to have slides and slides of this. So many links to criminality and attachment problems. Psychopathology, very strong links. Foster children are 9 times more likely to have psychological disturbance. And when I went to Bruce Perry's talk in 2006, this is a study he did in California looking at children who age out of the system. So children turn 18 and that's it. They're done. They're done. Now, they can sign a voluntary, but the ones who sign a voluntary are probably ones that would be okay anyway because they've got the wherewithal to sign the voluntary. He found that after a year of aging out in California, foster children who aged out were either 68% were either, or is it 60? Yeah, it's 68, either in jail or dead. A terrible statistic. And then, and I just got this off the National Association of Social Workers website, and it didn't have a date on it. I went all the way down to the bottom. I couldn't find a date. But it says 80% of the prison inmates in Illinois had been foster children at one time. So the statistics are not good. So a bonding assessment, this is fairly new, but one of the things they do is they look at everything multiple times. And so the question they're trying to answer is who can best provide a secure base for this child? Is it in a grandmother somewhere? Is it the placement where the child is? Is it the parents who are trying to do their services? And people who are predictable, consistent, and emotionally available. That's the question it answers. It answers that question by observing parents with children, foster parents with children, grandmothers with children, and seeing how they interact, by looking at court records, by doing a psych eval. So I used to do psych evals for foster children, and psych eval is very long and complicated. The older children that I got in there were very unhappy. I had a 15-year-old who did nothing but tell me to go to hell. I'd say, I'm doing an IQ a test, in what direction does the sun rise? Go to hell. Okay. And she also told me other things, including the horse I came in on, which I had never heard before. So I went home and said to my kids, have you ever heard that? You and the horse you came in on? Yeah, where you been? I went, well, apparently not where you've been, because they heard it and I didn't. So a lot of different ways to do a bonding assessment. Single or multiple interviews, videotape. This is sort of Mary Ainsworth stuff. Observing in the home, looking at court docs, psychological testing, especially psychological testing for the parent, because in the psychological evaluation, the psychologist, if you ask them, will give you a prognosis on parenting, and the measure is the question is whether this parent can minimally adequately parent. And I see that, I go, oh, I want more. I want more than minimally adequate. But that's the standard. And yes or no. And sometimes they'll say no. This child will be in danger if they're returned to the parents. And so that's the professional. And when judges will say, well, how do I make these decisions? I say, go to the professionals. Let them make the decision for you. Go to the psychologist. Let them do it. These are some symptoms of attachment problems. But they're also symptoms of oppositional defiant disorder and conduct disorder. Now, the 15-year-old I actually diagnosed with conduct disorder. Conduct disorder is a precursor for antisocial personality disorder, which is also psychopath or sociopath. And I don't even like the DSM-5 term, antisocial personality disorder, because it sounds like you don't want to go to a party. We're talking about Jeffrey Dahmer and the BTK killer and Charles Manson and icky people. So, a person can't be diagnosed as antisocial unless they have also had the symptoms for conduct disorder at 15 years old. So these are pretty serious. And they don't even have a therapy for attachment disorder. They used to have one where they roll the children up in a blanket or a rug and then they lean on them. Has anybody ever heard of this? Holding therapy, and then the child would yell and scream and cry, and while the therapist and the parent or foster parent or whoever is leaning on them, and the theory was it was cathartic. They'd get out all this anger and rage. And the first time I read about it, and I remember reading this very paragraph, and it said, and then they would calm down and they'd wiggle out of the blanket into the arms of their foster mother, and thus they're born again. And I went, ooh, amen. I mean, it sounded like a religious thing. Well, it didn't work for some children, and there's on the back of your handout, there's a book called The Death and Torture of Candace Newman, and it was a mother who was an RN. Now, for a while, my kids wanted me to build a cabin. I said, well, I can't build a cabin and have my house too, so you're going to have to let me live with you. So they actually all said yes, but I went to live with my daughter, and so I would break away and I'd go down to Streets of New York to read. So I remember I was at Streets of New York reading this book with a glass of milk. And I remember how angry I got while I was reading this, because this mother was a registered nurse, and they did this holding therapy. And this girl wasn't even diagnosed with attachment disorder. She just was misbehaving, I guess, or something, or her adoptive mother thought she might be leading that way. So they rolled her up and they leaned on her. After about 20 minutes, she quit yelling and screaming, and she was dead. And what's interesting is they had filmed all of this. So when it came time for the court, they were all convicted of something. And I was just so mad at this mother. I mean, you're a registered nurse. You should have known better. And then later I thought, when a parent needs help with their children and somebody says, I can help you, they say yes. And I probably would have done the same thing. So now the American Psychiatric Association doesn't like holding therapy anymore. and several children have actually died from it. So now we're back to square one. We don't have a therapy for it. But what they do recommend is that since they do have some therapies for ODD and conduct disorder, and some of these symptoms are the same, let's just use that until we find out. So this is still fairly new. It's just still fairly new stuff. So here's a case study. This is Rosie. This is the one I think I was telling you about. So the children had been out of the home, 3 older children, and the parents had another child, and they decided that would be a good time to reunify the older children. So they did. And so they were at home for about 9 months. And then they were removed because of neglect. Rosie is now 9 months old, and they were in foster care for 4 months. Then they were reunified. Rosie is now 13 months old, and they were in the home for 5.5 months. They were removed. These are the ones that were beaten with a belt. Removed again, and the case plan had always been family reunification. Rosie is now 19 months old, and this was wow, 3.5 years ago. I can't believe how fast it's gone. But Rosie has spent most of her life in foster homes, different foster homes. They did psychovals. The mother is mentally ill. Both parents are drug users. They were inconsistent. They never did their tests. They never did any tests at all. And so Rosie's been most of her life in foster homes. The attachment consequences of this for her are amazing. I mean, she doesn't know who to attach to, and she's just at that age where she's looking for somebody. And the case plan was inappropriate, and so we recommended severance and adoption, and the court said yes, and they changed it. But it took a long time. Yes. Use your mic, please. First time I've ever said that.
Is that why we keep hearing so much about reunification, even in sort of circumstances where it might not make sense at first blush? Is the attachment syndrome part of it?
You know, for years, family reunification was the standard. Get these kids back with the family. But now it's best interest of the child, which may not be reunification. And I was thinking about this on the way down. It seems that a benchmark for people who reunify children is to show how many reunifications they have. How many children have come out of foster care into back home, come out of foster care and go back home. But I wonder, because we're seeing more of this now, if they're going back too early, if they're not ready to go back. And so we have to, and remember, 52% minus somewhere between 25 and 65%. So it actually, I figured out once, it actually boils down to about 45 or 46% of children are reunified and stay reunified, only because I can't find the second level of re-entering foster care. And we're not talking about those, but we're talking about the ones who are in and out of foster care. So what we're seeing on the board, after being on for, I've been on for 18 years, and 2 of my board members longer, is we're seeing more of this now. And so we're wondering if they're not being reunified. Well, a couple of things. They're being reunified too soon. Maybe the services that the parents are getting are not adequate. During the recession, when was it, 2008 or whatever, they started to ask parents to self-refer to counseling, self-refer to domestic violence, self-refer to drug testing and things like that. That didn't go very well from what we could see. Well, did you self-refer? Well, what is that? Oh, well, you need to talk to your case manager about what that means. So a lot of things have changed in there, but what we see on the Foster Care Review Board, so a Foster Care Review Board reviews the case at least every 6 months, although we can ask to review it faster or more sooner if the case manager hasn't shown up or we have unanswered questions or whatever. And so what we've seen in our board on these cases is that we're seeing more reopens. Almost every month now we're getting 1 or 2 reopens, which means they were unified and it didn't take and they're back in the system. And the foster home they were in isn't open anymore. So if they were in a foster home that was good, it probably filled up like water on a beach in a hole. I don't know where I was going with that. But anyway, it filled up real fast. And now they're in another foster home. It'd be nice if they go back to the same foster home, but it didn't work that way. Now, we went back to Mrs. Haynes all the time because we were the only foster children she had. And all these books and toys she had just for us. That's what we thought. And then when I grew up, I said to her, so you were really well stocked because her kids were in college. And she said, well, We had other foster children. You did? Oh, I was disappointed. You did? She said, yeah. I said, well, over the years, how many do you think you had? Oh, I don't know. I think about 50. 50 foster children. And I'll bet they all thought they were the only ones. Now, just only a couple stayed in touch. I've had only one other, and my brothers and I stayed in touch with her over the years, but amazing. So, so I think something's wrong. They're being reunified too fast, and so this is another placement. When we're counting placements, going home is another placement, and then going back to another foster home is another placement. When they come into the system, they go into a shelter. That's a placement. They go to foster home. That's a placement. And then they decide to put them in all in the same foster home with their siblings. That's a placement. Now they've had all these placements. Their hope of attaching to anybody just diminishes with all of these placements. Here's another one, and this we still have her on our board. We went back and looked at our notes to 2004. We did this like a year ago, because we're looking and say, is this the same? And so our program specialist went and got all of our notes, thick notes of this child. And so she came in at 5 years old. She was sexually molested by her father and her mother's boyfriends. Boy, you know, the mother-boyfriend thing, you hear this all the time. It's so scary. And as a result, she acted out sexually. So her siblings got placed, but not her. And that was the problem. This was just last 2 years, year and a half ago. I'd never seen this before, but they were looking for a placement in Maricopa's therapeutic group homes, and they all denied her. She has no place to go. They also went outside Maricopa County, and they all denied her. She was in care to this point almost 11 years and had 24 placements. And this is the one that always did something when she got close to adoption. And the last thing she did was she actually just punched one of her foster siblings in the face, like in court or something. The parents said, forget it. So I'm not sticking with you. And that's the message to her. So nobody has stuck with her. So this child has never had anyway. So she's going to age out of the system at 18. And she may be one of those statistics that Bruce Perry talked about, either in jail or dead in a year. I don't know if it's true anymore, but there used to be a lot of kids hanging around under the bridge in Tempe. Somebody remember that? Are they still there? Huh.
A lot of cities are trying to push them out and find them and do a lot of things.
I hope so. I hope they help them, because it's not good. Okay, so this is sort of a summary of everything then. So here's the problem. The length of abuse or the neglect results in neurodevelopmental problems. And so 0 to 5, time is of the essence. If you don't think that the parents are going to comply with their case plan tasks, or you think there's a problem, you can recommend a concurrent a case plan of severance and adoption. And in fact, at a judge talk I was giving, one of the judges said, I think they all should have a concurrent of severance and adoption. Now, he got corrected pretty fast on that one, because some people, the kids do end up with the grandmother, the kids end up with the aunt. So we ended up with Mrs., and I just found this out like, I don't know, 8 years ago, that Mr. and Mrs. Haynes wanted to adopt us, and we wanted to be there. There was a big legal fight with my aunt and uncle in Chicago, and the one who owned the police department, and then the Haynes, and they said just about 8 years ago, we just didn't have the money to keep up the fight. We just didn't have it. So I don't know, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I was looking through some papers. I found my mother's will, and it said in the will, my youngest children, Elizabeth and Lawrence, are not to live with my sister and her husband, and gave their names. And I'm looking at this, and so I took it to my brother. The next time I saw him, which was like the next day, I said, "Did you see this? What is this?" He said, "Well, she didn't want you to live with Auntie and Uncle Bob." And I said, "Well, how come we went to live with her?" He said, "Well, rumor has it she paid off a judge not to probate the will." Anyway, so we ended up with Auntie and Uncle Bob. Shortly after we were there, Uncle Bob had a major coronary thrombosis. And I remember this because that's what they told us. Your uncle had a major coronary thrombosis. You know, I'm 11, thrombosis. And the only thing that was left out of the statement is, it's all your fault. These people never had children. I would ask them why they didn't have children. They said, because we didn't want any. Oh, okay. And then shortly after that, my aunt is getting ready, and she's putting on her lipstick, and she got her lipstick on. It kind of went up her nostril a little bit and over here. I'm going, I don't know much about makeup, but I don't think that's how you put on lipstick. So I called my brother, went to the phone with a little lock on, and went, could I have the Winnetka Police Department, please? Called my brother, and I was 11 years old. I didn't know what was going on. I said, something's wrong with Auntie. He said, what's the matter? I said, well, she's walking funny, and her lipstick's all over her face. And he said, oh, expletive. Hung up the phone, and they were there with this routine. Apparently, they'd done all the time. You take a hard chair, you put her in the hard chair, you carry her down the elevator, you put her in a taxi, and you send her off to a alcohol rehab place. She was alcoholic. And that's why my mother didn't want us to live there. So really very strange. But Mrs. Haynes kept in touch, and that was good. Okay, so the next one is unusual attachment behaviors. Educate the foster parents. Get a PhD level psychologist involved. I'm not convinced that the foster training that foster parents have is adequate for this, especially when they come in with these odd behaviors and they're disappointed that they don't have a child. In fact, at this little group that I told you about, most of those people, they went around and said, why are you here? Well, we want to foster, and we then foster and adopt. We want to foster and adopt. Well, a lot of the kids are going to they may not be able to adopt. They may have some pretty serious problems. So ask the parents, do you need anything? Is there anything you need? Do you need a class? Do you need a computer for your child? We'll go to Arizona Friends of Foster Kids and get you a computer. Just what do you need? Actually, they have to go through a financial disclosure at the beginning to make sure they're not doing it for the income. So that's one thing. And the Arizona is pretty careful about that. We have sometimes we have a case right now where the foster mother is the teacher of this child. They had no children. They took this child and then his sibling in, and they're you look on their backs and they have wings. I mean, there's amazing people. We have some people who have fostered children like Mr. and Mrs. Haynes over and over and over again. We have a lot of kinship care too, and that's fine. But one of the things that I learned when I was doing my research is that first of all, kin do not have to have any training unless they want the foster care money. Then they have to go through foster care training, but they have to have no training at all. But kin isn't magic. Kin doesn't mean you magically understand why this child is having these tantrums or hiding this food. So there's no kinship training. Although I think Michigan may have changed that. And 50% of children who are taken care of by kin the children are returned to the abusive parent. So there's a problem there. But a lot of grandparents. So I went out a few times to this group out in Sun City, and they're all grandparents taking care of their grandchildren in various states of legality. Some of them have guardianship. Some of them don't. And they're under this pressure where their grown children are saying, do this or we're going to take the kids away. Give us $100, we're going to take the kids away. And they're just so frustrated by this. And so my recommendation always is make it legal. Have them give you guardianship of these children, or go through the courts and become foster parents, foster grandparents. Do it legally. So it's a variety. It's a variety. And some of them, I met one at a talk I did last summer, and actually a friend of mine was there and introduced me to her. And she said, this girl is doing this, and I'm just trying to tell her that's just not the way you behave, and has no understanding whatsoever of this little girl's background, and is treating her like a middle class child who was raised in a loving home. And so my friend later said, what do you think? I said, I think she needs to not be a foster mother. I think she's just contributing to this child's stress. So it varies completely. But we always ask how many children are in the home. And, is there anybody else in the family that participates, like grandparents and things like that. And we always ask about that. There are various licensing agencies in Arizona, and they all have some basic training, but some of them differ. So there's Catholic Social Service, the Arizona Children's Association, Jewish Family and Child Services. So you can go to any one of those and then go through training, and they like this, but I think probably a little bit more training. Yeah. So yes. Oh, use your mic. Too late. Sorry.
I think you raised a really good question. Just because 2 days ago, a friend asked the same question. You hear, I think within media and just socializing, we don't really understand the process for foster parenting. What it is. And my kids are foster parents. As young as they are, the training this is in Washington, is it's weeks. It's nothing like a 2 day. I mean, at all. And 11 weeks. 11 weeks. So to go through that process, for one, there is no funding that is going to give you enough money to have a child come in and wet their bed on the first night, or come in with lice, and you have to treat them, take them into Seattle to get some formal treatment. There's no amount of money that is going to suffice for that, or even just have you want that desire. But I think because we have this, I was the same way. It was like, well, you hear the stories of there's going to be exceptions to everything. There could even be an exception to a casa, right? So I think there's bad apples everywhere, but I think that this training, it would be nice to understand really what is the foster care parents' process, because I didn't know this.
I think if you look up the licensing agencies, it will tell you online what you go through and what the classes are. They use the MAPS program here, I think. Anyway, yeah, it is. So if they don't have enough training, they should get more. Multiple people, multiple homes. I know that foster care is temporary. I know that, but I think it's important that we try to treat it like a real home. Our son's best friend was killed in a car accident when he was 12, and it just wrecked him. I mean, he became depressed. He started acting out. He did all kinds of stuff, and so we never had a thought of sending him somewhere else. Our thought was, what can we do to help him? And I sat through therapy after therapy session, and they were really good. Until my son actually said, "Do we have to go back there?" I went, "Do you want to go back?" No. I thought, "Oh, okay. Okay, good, great." New placement. Here's another thing. So I asked the groups who are foster parents, how many of your licensing agencies recommend that you stay in contact with children? And all but one, only one hand went up. All the others tell them not to. And I think that's a huge mistake, because Mrs. Haynes, she lived in Illinois, and we moved out to Arizona. She kept in contact with us all the time, even when we were adults, and she would just call. One time I was in just kind of a depressed state. I was having a bad day, a bad month, bad year, I can't remember. And out of the blue, she calls me. It just says, I don't know, I just had a feeling that I should be calling you now. We already talked about reevaluate with a new psych eval. Recommend a new psych eval if you see a child who's on multiple medications where it says depressed by report. That means they don't even remember when he was depressed. The bond with parents. One of the questions I ran across is an hour at McDonald's with the parents once a week enough to keep up that bond? And if we're hoping for family reunification, we need to keep up that bond, and it's probably not enough. No consistent person. Find a CASA, a previous foster parent, bless you, a sibling, a coach, something. So after my uncle had the heart attack, they told me he couldn't stay in Chicago for the winters. It was too hard. And so they packed us up and we came to Arizona, much to the dismay of my brother and I. By that time, I think I was 14 and he was 16, almost 17. And we were really mad about that. But our oldest brother jumped in a car and followed us out here. And he was the one who stuck with us, because I ran away from my aunts on a regular basis. And he lived out in Sin City, in Tempe, and that was a great place to go when you were a teenager. He to this day, if I write a letter, he'll say, "Well, I could have written that for you." I said, "Well, I can write a letter." He's just such a nice guy, and if it weren't for him, I don't know what would have happened to us. Again, if you doubt the return to parent, recommend a concurrent of severance and adoption. You can recommend a bonding assessment if you think that this child is attached to this foster home and there's some concern about him moving. If a return to parent is considered, we have to have confidence that these parents are going to follow through. And again, so here's another thing. It used to be that foster parent training was regular training or therapeutic foster training. And I think Bruce Perry was the first person to say that these children are suffering from PTSD. What a surprise. I don't know why people weren't saying that before. So it should all be therapeutic foster training, not regular and then therapeutic. It should all be, because they are having events that are outside of normal human experience. It's not normal for your parents not to take loving care of you and to neglect and abuse you. That's not normal. So it should all be therapeutic in my mind. A kinship foster parent training, encourage that. Say get foster training, and then you get some financial help, and you have a little bit more knowledge of the system. And then systemic problems. So there are some really interesting programs. One is Hope Meadows. This started in Illinois at a abandoned Air Force base. Dr. Brenda Ehart at the University of Illinois, who had two research concerns. One was intergenerational communities, and the other was foster children who move from home to home. So they started this adoption community. They bought this Air Force base. They went up to Chicago and they went down to Florida and said to a bunch of retired people, you come up to Rantoul, Illinois, and we'll give you apartments really cheap. We'll build some little golf courses for you, make them nice and short because you can't hit the ball long after like 60. And all we ask of you is 9 hours of foster grandparenting a week. And so they did. A bunch of them did. They got trained. They got people in there who wanted to be foster parents. They got trained, and they started this adoption community. They could have 4 children in a home. 2 could be theirs. 2 could be adopted, or 3 and 1, or 1 and 3, or whatever. And the grandparents don't give 9 hours of foster grandparenting a week. It's about 90. And what she found from this community, and there's a book on the back called Hope Meadows on the bibliography, and what she found is that it's good for everybody. The kids never leave. If they have a problem, there are people right there to help, just like a real family. So when we went to therapy with our son, I mean, we did it. Our oldest son did it. He just stood in the corner and grumbled the whole time. Fine. If this is what he needed. And it may not have been the therapy that helped. It might have just been the time that passed while we were doing this, while I was biting the inside of my cheek. No, it was good therapy. Then there's a group of therapists, one therapist, one child, for as long as it takes. And these are people who recognize all of the adults who go through these children's lives and how they need one person to stay with them, which of course will be you. And one almost last thing, come to the foster care review board meetings, because if you have a recommendation and we have a recommendation, and we can double up on that, make that recommendation to the judge, and it'll be even stronger. I used to get on my knees to ask you that, but I can't anymore. Well, I can, but I can't get back up again. Okay, I think we went through all these. These are just some recommended reading. Frances Cornos is a psychiatrist. City of One, a memoir. Her situation is so much like mine. It's amazing. Her father died from a brain tumor when she was 4. Her mother died from breast cancer when she was 10. Her foster family was named Jacobs. Ooh. A Gay Quarter did what you do. So if you read one book, this is the one you should read. Their guardian ad litems in Florida was exactly what you do. Just a great book. Frank Dyer testifies in court. So if you're interested in how they testify for termination of parental rights, you can read those. Language of Flowers. This is just a novel I read a few years ago. I thought it was really good. It's about a foster child who just kind of hung up on flowers and their meanings. And maybe this is what we need to find for some of these children. Find one thing they're interested in. Is it a horse? Is it drawing? Is it computers? Is it singing? Do they need a guitar? Just something for these children to hold on to that'll be a continuous thread in their lives. Foster Club, I'm a member of this. Anybody who was a foster child can be a member. This is a book about attachment in the preschool years. These are the therapists. One therapist, one child, for as long as it takes. A great book. And this is my little book, and it's available on Amazon. And this is the one about death and torture of Candace Newmaker. You really do need a glass of wine when you drink it. I don't promote drinking, but I do in this case. This is a really nice little video about how these neurons make connections in the early years, and explains how important it is that they have the right kind of attention, the right kind of interaction to strengthen these neural networks that are going to become important for later development. And then the Pelzer books, excellent books, and the Bruce Perry books, I'm a big fan of his. This is good. I've read this twice. I think I'm going to read it again. And then Ashley Rhodes Corder was one of the CASA kids for Gay Quarter, who was the second one on this list. And she ended up adopting her. She wrote a book called 3 Little Words. And they're not the 3 little words you think they are. So that's a second book you should read on the list. And then this is the Hope Meadows, the one in Illinois. And they're starting one in Arizona, too. I think I'm on the board. But they never call me. I don't know why. If you need me, here's my information. This is my personal cell phone and my personal number, because I'm just a part-timer now. And that is the name of my book. And this is a blog. I'm doing a blog. Just nothing, no big deal, but I'm just putting stuff there. This is Mrs. Haynes. She was just young then. She was probably, let's see, 93, and I was younger. And this is Jimmy and me, and we haven't changed a bit. Okay, all right.